I think we all know the story to Kevin Harvick's 2020 season. Elite, dominant, one of the greatest seasons in modern NASCAR history. In the first round of the NASCAR playoffs, it seemed like we were just counting down the races until we gave this guy the cup. Then the most dominant team all year would sputter over the final month of the season, with the 4 teams championship hopes ending with one of the greatest choke jobs in NASCAR playoff history.
You blew it!
It was very, very clear that Kevin Harvick and Rodney Childers had lost their advantage they had all season. And then losing a championship that they were heavily favored to win, I just had that instinct that 2021 was going to be the year that saved the lives of a lot of Busch cans, now that they wouldn't be getting crushed or shotgunned in victory lane. And considering how much myself and my fact-checking team here on this channel constantly get tweeted about on NASCAR Twitter, I of course had to hear about how wrong I was and how Kevin Harvick was going to have a career year, another elite season here in 2021. And 6 months later, I just want to ask the question, how's that going for you? Stewart Haas Racing and Ford have absolutely gotten their chassis handed to them, whether it's been short tracks, intermediates, or road courses, especially road courses. Still, I honestly expected Kevin Harvick and Rodney Childers to come on strong in the second half of the year. I mean, over the past 7 years, no matter the circumstances, no matter the adversity for this Ford team, they can always be counted on to at least be a contender for this championship as the cup is being handed out in November. But with some of the mediocre performances at tracks in Kevin Harvick's wheelhouse and some of the pessimistic comments made by the team, it's hard to envision this number 4 team reaching the high bar they've set for themselves over the past 7 years. So I think we all know pretty well, not very many drivers make it past 20 years. Many age like that Prairie Farms milk. But after last year, Kevin Harvick at 45 years old was still seen as one of the favored drivers to take home the 2021 Cup. And beginning in the heart of Florida, Kevin Harvick seemed to abandon the choker label he gained at the end of 2020 with 3 straight top 10 finishes, looking as stout and sharp as ever. Then the trouble started in Las Vegas. Starting from the pole, Kevin Harvick was absolutely awful in this race. I mean, it was bad. 20th place, a lap down, is absolutely unacceptable, completely pathetic for Kevin Harvick's standards in every single way. And for the next 5 races, Kevin Harvick would remain a mid-pack car and did not have the speed along the likes of Kyle Larson and Martin Truex Jr., not at all. In fact, for the throwback race in Darlington, Kevin Harvick would finally, and I mean finally, lead his first laps of the season at a track not named Daytona or Talladega. Now keep in mind, this is race number 12. In comparison, Kevin Harvick had already led 542 laps up to this point during his dominant 2020. The final race of note was the most recent race held in Lobster Country. This was far and away the only race this season where Kevin Harvick even looked remotely close to his 2020 form. The Busch Apple Ford led the most laps, including a large majority of Stage 2. It was a glass, or should I say can, of Busch Light Apple half full. Because in the end, a Stewart Haas car had the long run speed, drove up to the front, and won this race. It wasn't Kevin Harvick. That means for just the second time in Harvick's 8-year career at Stewart Haas Racing, he wasn't the driver to grab the team their first win of the season. Making this latest Cup Series race a Busch Light Apple can half full, as there were some positives, but yet a lot of emptiness, especially with how this season has gone so far. And in many cases, disappointment is the theme for not only Stewart Haas Racing, but even for Kevin Harvick. Even as this guy races and performs like he's on a completely different team than his other 3 teammates almost every single week. Almost everything from wins, top 5s, average finish, you name it, are set to plummet hard once the season wraps up in Phoenix. But perhaps the area where it will be hardest hit is going to be in the laps led. In fact, before the New Hampshire race, Kevin Harvick was on pace for his first season with less than 100 laps led. He was able to break past the triple-digit mark, but his 105 laps led to this date are set to be his lowest ever as a full-time Cup driver, through 21 entire seasons. Even 2002, where he sat out a race, even 2004, even the absolutely horrendous 2009. This season right here is set to be the one where Happy Harvick is supposed to have the most laps in dirty air. This is remarkable, yet still a massive letdown for a driver like Kevin Harvick, a crew chief like Rodney Childers, and a 4 team that has had tons of single races that have been over the 105 lap sled mark since 2014. So with all the disappointments and the trials and tribulations of trying to compete in NASCAR, just how can Kevin Harvick get back to his dominant and winning ways as a true contender for this title? Well, first off, I have to say it, Kevin Harvick, first off, he has to be of quality to even make the playoffs. If NASCAR had something like Fangraphs, I'm pretty sure Kevin Harvick's playoff odds would be somewhere around 70 to 80%. I think anything over 90 is out of touch with the way the nature of this NASCAR season has gone. It really also doesn't help that the best Kevin Harvick can do in the playoff grid without a win is where he's at now in 15th. Unless, of course, Denny Hamlin ends up breaking his leg playing one-on-one with Michael Jordan and has to sit out the remainder of the season due to a leg injury. And I think it's safe to say, amongst the drivers on or below the cut line, Kevin Harvick, he has the most to lose. Not only could he lose the longest streak of consecutive playoff appearances amongst active drivers, but missing the playoffs after the very season he had last year. Going from the regular season champion that won a quarter of the races last season to outside the top 16 in points, I have great reason to believe that such an occurrence would officially slam shut Kevin Harvick's window of contending for and winning a second NASCAR Cup Series championship. This especially when you consider the reputation of being a 58-time Cup Series winner, a decorated Cup Series champion. Kevin Harvick would officially outdo Jimmie Johnson's downfall from grace, completing it in just a year instead of Jimmie Johnson's in little less than 3. The position Kevin Harvick's in right now, it reminds me of all those years that Jeff Gordon was on the playoff cut line where he had to perform those last 3 to 4 weeks or otherwise his season, his underwhelming season to this point would be a massive failure. And in this month of August, Kevin Harvick, no doubt about it, he's going to need to be on the top of his game. He's going to need to be racing at the highest level he can in order to make the NASCAR playoffs. And regardless if we see a winner or not before the Daytona finale, he has to safeguard that 15th position from Tyler Reddick, a guy that has finished in the top 20 in 16 consecutive races dating back to Bristol back in March. It's clear Rodney Childers Racing doesn't have bad races per se, and thus there are a few things that Kevin Harvick's going to have to do to keep Tyler Reddick and Austin Dillon a race or more behind. Number 1, Kevin Harvick absolutely has to do good at the 2 road courses left in the regular season. These are a must, considering how awful Kevin Harvick has done in the prior road course races to date. Now, to his defense, his performance at the Daytona road course was solid. He scored a 6th place finish and he had a top 10 car for most of the day. But then Kuroda, he ended up getting a wreck, and I won't pinpoint this all on him because, you know, it was a NAS-frauded race. It was, to the largest extent, having these guys race in the rain, so I cut him a bit of slack there. But Road America, I have to say, it was straight up an embarrassing race for Kevin Harvick. It was absolutely awful. Kevin Harvick spent 8 laps in the top 15 all race long. 8! If there are more races akin to this one and his 22nd place finish at Sonoma, Tyler Reddick will be within 20 to 30 points before Daytona. But if Kevin Harvick can limit the damage to 10 to 15 points and maintain a 50-point cushion over Reddick, all he'll really have to do is ride it out for stages 1 and 2, and in all likelihood, Kevin Harvick will clinch a spot in the postseason before the final stage, barring of course a new winner in the other 3 races. Because if a guy like DiBenedetto pulls off a massive upset at Watkins Glen or Indy, this is a brand new ballgame. Fortunately for Harvick, the second to last race will be raced at his home park, as Michigan has been a track where Kevin Harvick has been able to hit dingers, and in fact, he hasn't lost an August Michigan race in over 4 years. He won in 2018, he won in 2019, and of course he swept the races last year. If it all comes down to that, Michigan absolutely becomes a must-win situation for Kevin Harvick. Checkers or wreckers all the way. Because if not, Kevin Harvick's going to be in the midst of all the chaos, the eye of the storm, with 14 other drivers panicking to keep their championship hopes alive, knowing that a win by Buescher, Stenhouse, Suarez, Bubba Priest, or even Anthony Alfredo will officially knock him out of the playoffs. So if Kevin Harvick survives all the chaos and officially clinches his 12th consecutive playoff appearance, Just what are the odds that he forgets his season as the choker, puts 2020 behind him, and goes on a run to win the 2021 championship? Well, what I have to say to that is, honestly, I think this season is very reminiscent to the one Kyle Busch had the year before. And you got to think about it. Both of these drivers, they dominated their respective regular seasons. Then the next season, they absolutely struggle and they end up entering the playoffs. They squeak in as a bracket filler. They're not really one of the championship contenders and one of the guys seen that can really be a favorite. And similar to KFB, when I look at the tracks in the round of 16, it's safe to say Kevin Harvick shouldn't have a problem advancing, even if he enters the playoffs with pennies compared to the quarters and dimes guys like Kyle Larson and Martin Truex Jr. are going to have in their playoff bank. In fact, these are the very races that Kevin Harvick should go into thinking about, hey, I can win this race and extend the consecutive win streak to 12 seasons. Both Darlington and Bristol, he enters as the defending race winner of those respective events. And if he can show signs of life like at New Hampshire, these might be Kevin Harvick's best chances to get that elusive win this season, along with Michigan. So honestly, there's really nothing to worry about for this team in advancing in the round of 16. The true point of concern for Kevin Harvick and Rodney Childers has to be the round of 12. Las Vegas back in March, as previously mentioned, was absolutely horrible for this 4 team. You could have tied a freaking anchor to this 4 car and it wouldn't have made a difference in Harvick's final result. Talladega, Harvick is in the Ford camp and has done a good job making it to the end of these races as of recent, but at the end of the day, your chances of visiting the Infield Care Center are 39 times more likely than visiting the likes of Victory Lane. Finally, you have the Charlotte Roval, and statistically this has been a solid track, a dependable track for Happy Harvick. However, it might not be the case this season considering just how awful he's been at the road courses this year. So therefore, I'm going to be honest, Kevin Harvick fans, here's your warning. Kevin Harvick this season, he is really going to have to do some miracle work to have a shot at the 2021 title, have a really good chance, as I'm just not digging this team and their performance that they've shown this year. And it's not just me saying this, as going off a quote from Rodney Childers, this 4 team has a very pessimistic look about improving their performance this year. My honest answer is, it kind of is what it is at this point. You don't have many races left before the playoffs. We'll probably go to the wind tunnel 2 more times before the playoffs start, maybe 3 times. So from a car side, we're not really going to make the cars much better than where they're at this weekend at Atlanta. And judging off of his performance in Atlanta, that was a very, very mediocre race. Kevin Harvick had a 10th to 15th place car, and that's where he ended up finishing in the 11th position. And thus, if this 4 team's gonna perform more akin to that, and they're not really going to improve, it's hard for me to see a scenario where Kevin Harvick makes it past the round of 12 and goes deep into the NASCAR playoffs well into November trying to win his 2nd championship. But then again, Tony Stewart blatantly went out and said that his number 14 team would be wasting a spot in the playoffs. And how'd that go again?
And he's going to become a 3-time NASCAR Sprint Cup champion. Tony Stewart wins it.
So we got it? We got it. We got the tiebreaker, baby. Awesome job.
So anyways, this is NRF signing out, and just remember, life's a beach and then you drive.